The next one is a zigzag seam. It says prepare a plain seam, and I've done that here. Press seam flat open, I've done that. Set machine for zigzag. So now on your machine, you're going to take your stitch selection dial and turn it to number 2. And you'll hear your machine kind of click in, and you'll remember it's number 2 because the picture that's kind of in a browny orangey here, and number 2, it shows a zigzag seam. This should already be set on about 3. This stays on 2.5. Now I'll shift my machine over just a little bit. Now, what you do is we're going to zigzag just the seam allowance. So just take this fabric and hold just the seam allowance, and you that are watching me, go ahead and do it at the same time, and then kind of shake everything away. We're only going to be stitching through 1 layer of fabric. We are not stitching anything together. And videographer, can you zoom a little bit more close to the needle? Okay. So I'm going to put the needle down, and sometimes if the needle wants to pull the fabric down, if you back the needle up just a little bit, it'll lift the fabric just a little bit. Lower your presser foot. And now I'm going to zigzag along the cut edge of my fabric, and I want to stay away from that seam. So I want to make sure that I zigzag when I start. Pardon me, I backstitch when I start, and I zigzag close to the edge. I backstitch when I finish. Now to do the other side of the seam allowance, I take this other seam allowance and I shake it so that all the fabric stays away. Put my needle down, backstitch when I start. Oops, now my thread got caught. I can just cut that, and that might happen to you sometimes. And if that happens, you just cut the thread and pull it. And I'm zigzagging close to the cut edge, so I can't line it up to any measurement here. I'm watching where the needle is sewing. Backstitching when I start, backstitching when I finish. And now if I hold this up, here's the important part. You see the zigzag on either side? Notice that I have not sewn anything down. I have simply put a zigzag on each side of the seam allowance. And why you do this is because if you have sewn a pair of pajama shorts, for instance, and if you do not put a zigzag or some other kind of edge treatment, when you wash these a couple of times, this fabric is going to start to fray. And you do not want the fabric to fray all the way to the seam, or you're going to have a hole right up the edge of the seam of your pajama pants or whatever else you're sewing. Now, sometimes we do this a little differently, but for the seam sample, you're going to do it like this. Do you see how it's kind of ruffly there? After you trim your seams, you can go back to the iron and press it, and it will flatten out because the heat of the iron will make those fibers line up again, and they won't be as ruffly. That is your zigzag.